And now Ellen Oliver Keene.
Thanks, Roseanne. First, I just would like to extend my heartfelt thanks to everyone at the PEBC who put together this luncheon and this extraordinary honor for all of us. And I want to recognize especially the lab teachers. It's hard to know what they contribute if you haven't been in one of those classrooms, and I would strongly recommend that you do that. There are two additional people that I'd like to recognize before I give a couple of brief remarks. The first, of course, is Susan Zimmerman, without whose vision this organization, none of us would be here, and it was an extraordinary vision indeed, but coupled with the ability to really get things done. And also to Rick O'Connell, the former superintendent of the Douglas County Schools, again, whose guidance and wisdom from the earliest days of the PEC then he had a razor-sharp focus on children and never lost that, and grounds the PEBC's work to this day. From the beginning, the PEBC has invested in teachers' knowledge and understanding. It has, study after study after study, has shown that there is no greater influence on student achievement than a well-informed teacher with a clear understanding of each child in his or her classroom, a wide range of pedagogical strategies, and a deep knowledge of the content that he or she is charged with teaching. And somehow, without the benefit of those studies, we intuited this at the PEBC from its earliest years, investing first in small grants for innovative classroom practices, and eventually moving on to provide in-depth classroom-based support for teachers. The PEBC continues to keep its eye on that ball, reaching over 17,000 teachers and over 1 million students in its 25-year run. The PEBC's long view, the next 25 years, so sorry, Roseanne, you've got another 25 ahead of you, must include, I believe, maintaining the focus on professional learning for teachers and school leaders, but must also include an element that may be the most challenging in its work up to this point. PEBC and all of those of us who support public education must now think about changing the way we think about children's learning potential, particularly those children who live in poverty. We must, all of us, rethink the oldest and most privately held beliefs about which children are going to make it in this country and which are not. We must hold the highest expectations for each child's intellectual engagement and achievement at school, at home, and in the community. We must redefine what it means to succeed in American schools, from scoring well on a test to creating the conditions in which all children will be intellectually engaged and think at high levels every day. When I left the PEBC in 2000 to work in 28 of this country's lowest income schools in places like Philadelphia, Trenton, New Jersey, Talladega County, Alabama, and Shannon County, South Dakota, I became acutely, painfully aware of the factors that impede students' achievement and well-being in America's schools, and indeed here in Colorado. It wasn't until I immersed myself in those schools that I truly came to understand what it means to have high expectations for all children. When we raised expectation in those schools, the children simply rose to the occasion, every child, every day. I learned that in the face even of crushing poverty, all children are hardwired to learn at high levels and are in fact intellectually ravenous. In too many of this country's schools, we aren't feeding them. We need to raise expectations for children's learning, but in a manner that perhaps few of us have yet imagined. Instead of continuing to have conversations about testing more and scoring higher, utterly the wrong questions in this debate, we must strive to change our thinking and our actions related to what children can accomplish academically and intellectually. We must consider some long-held beliefs that simply must go. We must first abandon the belief that all children enter school with a fixed intellectual capacity, IQ, that is unlikely to change. We must forsake the belief that children in poverty don't have the background knowledge or home support to make it to the highest levels in their K-12 schooling. We must abolish the belief that children who come from disadvantaged homes, often children of color, enter school with intellectual deficits, and we must walk away from the belief that children with learning differences or those who speak a language other than English will never achieve at high levels. Beliefs such as these have stymied us in this work for decades, and until and unless we are able to put them to rest in the hearts and minds of all Americans, I have grave concerns about our reform models, even the best ones. The PEBC can lead us in the formulation of a new set of questions, far more relevant to today's schools. We need to be very public with these questions, asking them of our educators and policymakers, our legislators, our local and state school board members, our esteemed governor and mayor, who have long supported the PEBC and who join us today to show that support. What are those new key questions? First, are teachers encouraged to focus instruction in real depth on the curriculum that matters most? Secondly, are children given enough time to think about and apply new understandings? Or are teachers rushing on to cover the next skill in the curriculum? If children don't work with ideas, if they don't have an opportunity to apply what they've learned, they simply will not retain and reapply those concepts. And finally, are children throughout the grade spectrum challenged to think about concepts that are complex and abstract? Or do we water down curriculum because of those entrenched ideas about children's aptitude and potential I mentioned a moment ago? As a community, we need to redefine and dramatically increase our perceptions of what qualifies as success in America's schools. Instead of using a single test administered once a year to define success, we need to teach for and expect the highest levels of thinking from each child every day. We need to believe that all children can learn at high levels. Such statements have been part of our rhetoric for well over a generation in this country, but we do not yet walk our talk. Until and unless we can make this sea change in our thinking about children, the PEBC's important work and our dearest hopes for all children and the future of this democracy may be for naught. Children absolutely are capable of learning in great depth and thinking at high levels every day. I've witnessed it in some of this country's lowest income schools, and if they can do it there, it's time we abandon the rhetoric of high expectations and ask the questions that will lead to the reality of high-level learning for every child every day. The PEBC is clearly positioned in this community to promote this change. Are we, each of us, ready to get behind them?
Thank you, Ellin.